Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The shadow knows.
Last week I took a look at Darkman, a movie and character Sam Raimi created because he couldn't make The Shadow, which is a 1994 American superhero film directed by Russell Mulcahy, written by Martin Koepp, and stars Alec Baldwin as the eponymous hero. Intended as a flagship franchise starter, it flopped critically and commercially on release, and having just seen this again for the purposes of this review, they recreated the look and feel of a pulp comic beautifully, but I have to say they should have just let Sam Raimi adapt the character, because he did a far better job of creating a character study of what evil lurks within a man's heart with Darkman than they did here. But before I get ahead of myself and say exactly why in the intro, let's start at the beginning. The origins of a movie have their roots way back on radio in the 1930s, where the character made his debut as the third-person narrator on Street and Smith's Detective Story Hour. He was such a popular character that fans of the show would write in and demand adventures starring the Shadow himself, with Street and Smith hiring Walter Gibson to write a monthly series of pulp mystery novels starring the Shadow as the main character. These ran until 1949 and were some of the most successful pulp magazines of all time. Starting in 1937, the character received his own radio show, originally starring Orson Welles as Lamont Cranston and his alter ego the Shadow, with other actors going on to star as the character in later years, with the radio show finally finishing in 1955. Which brings us to the 1980s, and 1982 to be more precise, when Martin Bergman, the producer, acquired the rights. Originally, Robert Zemeckis was attached to the production, which is why Sam Raimi was rebuffed when he wanted to adapt the character to the big screen. He then went on to create the character of Darkman, partly inspired by The Shadow, with the blessing of Universal Pictures. With Zemeckis dropping out at some point after this, Martin Koepp was brought in to write a new draft script in 1990, finally being able to find one that appealed to the studio, with Bergman reminiscing. Some of them were light, some of them were darker, and others were supposedly funnier, which they weren't. It just didn't work. The movie is largely based on the pulp novels, with the overall tone being kept from the original radio show. The elements from the radio show are his ability to become invisible, the appearance of Margot Lane, and the establishment of Lamont Cranston as the Shadow's actual civilian identity. The pulp magazine elements include his costume, his network of agents at his disposal, and his twin semi-automatic pistols. The actual plot of the movie is, however, wholly original and created for the big screen, not being a direct adaptation of any prior The Shadow stories, from either print or radio. Just like modern superhero character adaptations, The Shadow was meant to be a big summer tentpole franchise starting blockbuster with all the tie-in trappings that go along with that, namely toys, games, and clothing lines. However, the film was a commercial and critical failure, only grossing $48 million against a budget of $40 million, possibly due to the very stiff competition for people's attention it faced, going up against The Lion King early in its run and then The Mask later on. Almost certainly not helped by the largely negative critical response, with Michael Wilmington writing in the Chicago Tribune summing up most criticism, writing, "The Shadow shows what can happen when you overdress pulp. You wind up with something gorgeous and suffocated, bejeweled trash floundering in its over-splendid stuffings." This being an opinion I can fully understand. Usually when I do a look back at, I have a long history with the film and have seen it probably more than a dozen times over the years, and just rewatch the film to confirm in my mind what I'm going to write. It wasn't until I watched The Shadow that I realised that yes, I have actually seen this a few times back in the 90s and noughties, having totally forgotten it even existed. For fairly obvious reasons to me too after a rewatch. But firstly, let's look at the good things. This film has amazing style. The look of the sets and the characters are literally like they have been ripped straight from the page of a pulp noir detective magazine. They drip with the style and ruby red lip charm of that genre. Maybe only Tim Burton's Batman has ever captured this feel better for me. The special effects, even after almost 3 decades, kind of generally hold up, being a blend of practical, optical and CGI, with as usual only the mid-90s CGI looking especially ropey at this point. Although it isn't ever so bad that it took me out of the film, like a lot of CGI does from this era. The cast is stellar, with Ian McKellen and especially Tim Curry stealing the show in supporting parts. Also, for a 90s film, the choice of John Lone, an actual Asian actor to play the character of Shi Wan Khan, should be applauded, because white actors doing yellowface has been the norm until even today, and he's excellent in the part. This is where the problems start though, and they largely centre around the main character of the Shadow. Martin Koepp actually wrote the part with Alec Baldwin in mind, saying, "He has the eyes and the voice, he had so much of what I pictured Cranston being." I have to disagree. I like Alec Baldwin as an actor in general, but not in this role. I can't put my finger on why, but he just lacks any real charisma, character, or on-screen presence as either Cranston or the Shadow. It's possibly not his fault though, because compounding this issue, the Shadow himself has one major problem for a visual medium like movies and TV. He is a shadow. In fact, it goes beyond that. He's only a shadow when you shine a light on him, otherwise he's entirely invisible. The studio or writer must have been aware of this, so took the creative decision to make him largely not the Shadow in a movie called The Shadow. He's the Shadow only 4 times, very briefly, throughout the almost 100-minute runtime, 3 of which he's discovered and shot or stabbed by the bad guys almost instantly. I imagine so that he is quickly forced to change back into a corporeal form. Also, by the mid-90s, the Shadow IP hadn't been particularly hugely culturally relevant for almost 4 decades. It's not a character many people younger than their 50s at the time would have much of a relationship with, it being at the height of its popularity in the 30s and 40s and had kind of died off by the late 50s. So it's not like the character had a massive inbuilt fan base it could rely on coming out to the cinema like say Batman or Superman could. Koepp has stated that he wrote the screenplay based on the copy line, "Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men?" writing what he describes as a character study in someone who is uncomfortably familiar with what evil lurks within his own heart. Except you never even get a mild hint of that as portrayed in this film, with him appearing on screen as a fully formed good guy with Cranston's transformation from drug-dealing warlord to superhero being explained with a text card. A goddamned text card! Throw in the fact that the bad guy is essentially a mirror image of the Shadow, but just evil, possessing largely the same powers as Cranston, who also just appears on screen as a fully formed bad guy, appearing in a literal box, then instantly and needlessly killing 2 people just to underline how evil he is, making the plot largely entirely forgettable, and there's no engaging conflict or character story arcs here to grab your attention. There are other really baffling creative choices with this film too that are never really explained, like why does the Shadow's face change sometimes when he wears his disguise and only when he wears his disguise, and why is he constantly laughing? It all adds up to a largely forgettable, bejeweled spectacle, and one that I'm really not surprised failed at the box office. I didn't hate this, I was just largely baffled by the creative choices made throughout. So that was The Shadow, a largely forgettable pulp detective noir that, to be honest, they should have just let Sam Raimi adapt, because he did a far better job of creating a character study of what evil lurks within a man's heart with Darkman than they did here. If you enjoyed that, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, because next week we'll slam some evil with the Phantom. Right, Candy? You ready to slam some evil with the Phantom?